Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you on this first of the kind webinar by Energyville to explain you some of our fact sheets, and it's really very pleasant surprise for me that you are so numerous here on the webinar. We have 170 people that announced themselves to be present, so it's a great success, and I hope that after an hour you will be convinced that the next ones will be as important for you to listen to as this first one. So welcome here, and welcome in these difficult times, bizarre times of Corona. And as CEO of Energyville, I would like to introduce you to two speakers, Jeff Beerten and Hakan Ergun, later on. But some housekeeping rules. As a participant of this webinar, you will automatically be muted. And if this is not the case, please mute yourself. And please don't interrupt the speakers and mute your microphone. Otherwise, we get very weird sounds. Questions may be asked in the chat area of this meeting. We have foreseen the Q&A session at the end of the webinar, where we will try to cover as many questions as possible. But should you have additional questions, read also the paper which is on the website. And did your questions get not covered, please send an email to communications@energyville.be, and we will answer them afterwards offline. And the video recording of this webinar will be made available online next to the expert talk of Hakan Ergun, which has previously been published online already. And now, without further ado, I give the floor to Jeff Beerten. I'm not going to say too much about him. He's one of the professors dealing with grids, and also later on, Hakan Ergun is in the same group. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ronnie, for the introduction. So basically, what I would like to talk about in the next 15 minutes is the impact that we've seen on the power system as a result of COVID-19. So basically, we're gathering here the input from variable sources, including NSOE, including EDSO, including the Belgian system operator Elia, and 50 Hertz, one of the German system operators. So part of this work was done as part of a larger study, and I'll provide you with that information at the end of the slide set, which was actually a rather comprehensive overview of how the power system worldwide is being impacted as a result of COVID-19, and how system operators in transmission and in distribution around the world have actually responded to this new crisis. And we provided quite some input to that study. So basically, the different aspects that I'd like to discuss with you today are the loading on the power system. This is probably the one that has been received most attention and quite some media coverage. Secondly, I would like to say a few words about how the crisis is managed and what the implication of it are with respect to critical personnel working with the system operators, and how construction project, maintenance projects are being affected. And I'll end, and that's also a stepping to the next presentation, with some challenges that have been reported when it comes to grid operation. So the loading on the power system it's a trend that we've seen within Europe, but also worldwide, as a result of the industry slowing down, less public transportation, offices being closed, and so on, people working at home. We've seen a significant reduction in the peak demands and in the loading on the power system in general. And on this slide, you can see some weekly averages of the total load on the Belgian power system, for example, with a comparison with the average of the previous years. And you can see that there has been a significant drop in demand. And what is interesting here already in this slide is that we can see that this drop in demand is actually more or less following also the measures taken by the national government, the Belgian one in this case. And the more severe the measures have become, the more industries have been affected, the more we've seen actually an impact on the power system loading. So this is a general trend. It's not only within Europe the case, but it's the case pretty much everywhere around the world. Although we can see some regional differences, and to a large extent, those regional differences can be explained by the severity of the restrictions imposed by national governments. So what we could see, for example, at the beginning of April was that countries who were heavily impacted by the virus, such as Italy, Spain, but also France, already reported on significant reductions in their loading levels on the system. In Germany, where the impact in the beginning was slightly less severe, we saw a lower reduction, for example, than with the Belgian power system at the beginning of April. So there seems to be some correlation there, obviously. Then how was it actually managed within the system operators, within the companies? Well, first and foremost, I think it's important here to point out that basically system operators everywhere in the world are very aware of the crucial role they're playing to make sure that the lights are being kept on, and in that sense also doing their fair share and making sure that society keeps running. What we have seen with the system operators is that they have put special task forces in place. For example, within Elia and 50 years, they reported on transversal task forces that actually spanned all the activities of the power system of the system operator, which was actually managing the crisis. One of the important things there was obviously not only managing the power system, but also make sure to keep a very close link with national authorities. And this was also something reported by ENSOE, the organization grouping all the European transmission system operators, as very crucial to make sure that the continuation of the core activities and services of the system operators could be guaranteed. Both the transmission systems operators and the distribution system operators reported on the importance of also increased communication and collaboration amongst them, but also other communication with relevant stakeholders in the energy sector have been reported. For example, with generation companies, energy market players, but also with IT and telecom providers who are not the traditional energy system players, but are very essential also for the continuity of services. Now, in general, it has been pointed out by the industry that the crisis is experienced as a major challenge, but that it is being managed in accordance with planning and business continuity processes that the different system operators have in place. And in that sense, it's also important to point at the degree of international collaboration and coordination to exchange best practices, which, for example, takes place in international organizations and bodies such as ENSOE and ETSO. And also on a regional level, let's say the frameworks to prepare the different system operators for the risks that are potentially there in terms of power system operation is being pointed out as very crucial. So a number of measures have been taken with the different system operators, including hygiene and sanitary measures, travel restrictions, and other organizational measures. In terms of hygiene and sanitary measure, I think this shouldn't come as any surprise. Basically, those are in line and probably still reinforced with respect to the companies. The measures that we are all following at this moment, including intensified cleaning, disinfection, but also for critical personnel, scanning of temperature, as has been reported, no handshake, keeping distances, and also increased personal protection equipment for employees wherever this is applicable. In terms of travel restrictions, well, this is obviously impacting severely, in a severe way, the international travel by the people working the system operators, but also for the larger countries, national travel restrictions have been reported. And when it comes to organizational measures, here I would like to focus first a bit on the critical personnel. While it is true that the companies everywhere, and hence also the system operators, have largely shifted to working from home for most of their employees, this is not possible for all employees. For example, for people working in the control centers, but also for teams which are doing the interventions and the maintenance in the system, but also for other supporting personnel such as security and IT. So control centers is the first group personnel I would briefly like to talk about. What we see here is that as a general trend, we see the most stringent measures in Europe, but also in the rest of the world with respect to control center staff. And that also shouldn't come as a real surprise if you think about the fact that the control room can really be considered to be the cockpit of the power system. So that's actually where all operative decisions are taking place. So first and foremost, we see a very strictly limited access to control centers, but also the personnel that is working in the control centers is seeing, let's say, most restrictions, for example, not being able to use public transportation anymore, also forced to work from home whenever they're not on shift. And also here, additional cleaning, additional hygiene and contact measures, for example. Some DSOs in Europe even reported that they actually have prepared for, let's say, follow-up schemes and identified people that recently retired with control room experience should they be necessary. What is interesting here is that in other regions in the world, sequestration has been reported. This is not the case in Europe, so that really means putting, let's say, isolating the people that work in the control rooms and not sending them home anymore. So let's say that in Europe, the trend seems to be that the plans are ready for such a phase, should it really be necessary, but it's not being applied at this moment. Intervention teams for field operations obviously also see quite some changes to their day-to-day work patterns. And what we see at this moment is that the different organizations are drafting or in the process of drafting them or finishing the first versions of them, of adjusted work plans to make sure that physical distances can be accommodated, which includes separated shift schedules to keep crews separate from each other, but also different protocols being put in place when the jobs do require more than one person working on a piece of equipment at the same time. In terms of the projects themselves, there seems to be a general trend here as well within Europe and the rest of the world that there is a reduction of work plans for field work. So with this, on this point, and so we basically reported that they think that new connections and development projects can be affected with some delays, but it will to a large extent depend on the duration and the severity of this crisis. So it's a bit early at this moment to really draw a final balance on this. The supply chain at this moment is not yet considered to be a major issue. But also here within Europe, different stakeholders indicated that this might become an issue if we get during off transportation and travel restrictions throughout the rest of the year. At this moment, let's say that we have seen that a lot of the DSOs are updating their procedures to prepare for the phase that we're entering also in Belgium at this moment, where we are actually going past the full lockdown. And here it's important that these procedures are not only limited to the own personnel of the companies, but also to all external contractors involved in the construction projects. It is interesting here as well, if we look at the different parts of Europe, different countries, that we have seen quite some noticeable differences as well in how work plans are being adjusted. And also here there's a direct link with the severity of restrictions reported. For example, within Elia, within Belgium, the construction sites basically all stopped, or work on those sites stopped after the governmental measures, whereas in Germany at 50 Hertz, they basically reported that the work on these sites was much less impacted. And also within the rest of Europe and other parts of the world, we've seen quite some divergence there. And also at the distribution system level, EDSO has seen quite some different reported activity levels, ranging from basically only continuing essential services, only including potentially urgent interventions, to a high level maintained and not really a severe impact being measured. And that brings me to the final point I would like to make, which is on, let's say, the impact that all of this has had on the operation of the power system, which we have seen basically, and that brings me back to the beginning of my story, is low loads on the power system. Hakan will dive deeper into this. We've also seen a high level of renewable energy source penetration. So in some parts of the world, system operators and utilities have reported challenges when it comes to controlling the system voltage, and even concerns being raised with respect to lower system strengths at some points in the network. Now, it's important here to point out that actually throughout Europe, this has not really been seen that much as a point of concern at this moment. So there are a number of European transmission system operators who have reported on higher system voltages, but they actually didn't see any noticeable differences with, let's say, weekend days and bank holidays. And they reported they could manage it all with the existing procedures in place. So that's at least something to keep a close eye on. And something else that we've seen is changes in loading patterns as people are working from home. We are seeing a change in load during the day in terms of the profile, which can also cause additional challenges for load forecasting. So with that, I would like to conclude. What we can actually see when it comes to the power system, what we can conclude from this is that system operators actually responded very quickly to this new pandemic situations through establishing special task forces, very close operation with national authorities and other system operators, amongst others, and that measures have been taken to make sure that control center staff and other critical personnel are being kept safe and healthy. And with respect to the power systems themselves, they have been reported to largely remained in a normal state, although be it with lower loading conditions, which are in a way similar to what we have on weekends and bank holidays. And with that, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Hakan Ergun.
Yeah,
Maybe a final point to quickly make here for those of you that are interested. There is a study out there by IEEE Power and Energy Society, which kind of gives a comprehensive overview of how the industry has responded around the world to the crisis.
Thank you, Jeff. Hakan will share his screen now. I think it's a very good overview, and may we say that that IEEE paper can also, the link can be found on our website, and we are quite proud and honored to have been the kernel point for Europe, acting with NTOE and EDSO for smart grids, and also with extremely good information that we got from Elia, Fluvius, and the whole grid operators. I think we have done a good job there, and yeah, the lights were on, and it's not always easy, as Hakan will now explain. Hakan, floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. I hope that my screen is visible in the meanwhile.
Correct. Yeah,
okay.
It is.
Let's try to. What I want to talk about today is some data analysis that we have done on the current situation, where we have low demand and high renewable generation in Europe due to, I would say, good weather conditions. So what we have done there is actually to compare these values, this generation, demand, and price profiles we have observed in Belgium and neighboring countries, to a number of previous years. And then by looking at the effects that we observe, we will try to come up with some I would say, short-term and long-term conclusions. Here to be mentioned also that for this data analysis, we used the data from the ENTSO-E transparency platform. All right, let's dive into it. So the first figure you can see here on the slide is the average, so the total demand in Belgium. And obviously we can see very, very clearly that the purple curve, which corresponds to the year 2020, this year, in the period of let's say, the April, is obviously much lower than what you would expect in the previous years. And also highlighted here in the circles, we can also see that even the weekday demand that we observe in Belgium is still actually lower than the weekend demand that we have observed in the previous years. And that also comes back to what Jeff said, that this can actually be an issue for system operation. When we look at the dynamics, in fact, the dynamics do not look too different, at least in Belgium, in terms of the daily averages. So what you can see here on the left-hand figure is average weekday demand, again corresponding to the period 31st of March. And we can observe actually that the midday peaks and the evening peaks are actually following rather similar patterns, both actually on weekdays and on weekends. The only thing that we can observe is that actually the demand increase in the morning hours seems to happen a bit slower. And this is probably due to the fact that, of course, many people are working from home, so they don't have to commute to their work and then basically can start their days a bit later, and that kind of spreads the demand in these hours. We can also see here that the average demand is, of course, much lower than observed in the previous years. And also, if you look at the ratio between the maximum demand observed and the minimum demand observed over this time period, compared again to the years previously, that there is not really a huge change in that either. Secondly, let's have a look at how the power generation in Belgium. The first thing that we can observe is actually compared to the previous years, and especially 2017, that the nuclear generation has been much higher this year, where we had, of course, some outages of some reactors in these particular years. But of course, what we can also observe, and more importantly, is the increase in renewable energy in feed. So here in the highlighted area, you can see the power injection from PV, onshore and offshore wind. And we can see, especially in the second half of April, especially offshore wind has really picked up in power production. And if you look again to the average number, we can actually observe that although the demand is much lower in Belgium, the total generation in 2020 has been higher than in the years 2017 and 2018. So we can see in 2017 we had roughly 7.4 gigawatts of hourly generation on average, whereas actually this value is almost 8.1 gigawatt in 2020. But what we can also observe is that the share of renewable energy, especially with renewable here, I'm only talking, of course, of PV and wind, amounts actually to 20% of the total generation, which is remarkably higher than in the previous years observed. We can make the same observation also for Germany, sorry, and obviously Germany has a high impact on electricity prices because of the sheer amount of the renewable capacity installed there. And again, if you look at 2020, we can actually observe the same pattern as we had in Belgium, having a lot of wind injection in the second half of April. But if you compare this to the year 2018, we can also see that actually on average, the renewable generation has actually not been as high as it was in 2018, where also in the first half of April, there was a lot of renewable generation in Germany. And again, looking at the numbers, we can see that the average power generation in Germany has dropped, also according, of course, to the drop in demand. And what we can observe is that in terms of the ratio of renewable energy to the total energy is a bit higher than in the years 2019 and for sure much higher than 2017. But compared to the year 2018, it was both in absolute and relative values lower. So in a way, we had a lot of renewable generation in the system in this period, but actually it could have been more. I think that's the message we can take home from here. Thirdly, I want to have a quick look at the day-ahead electricity prices. So here on these figures, we can see the day-ahead electricity prices again for this year and the previous years in this particular period for Belgium, Germany, France, and the Netherlands. The very first thing that we can observe is, of course, that there is a much higher number of negative price events that we can observe. So this is actually very clearly visible in all these purple curves here. On the other hand, we also have to say that these negative price incidents are not something new. Also, for instance, in year 2019, it has been observed both in Belgium, in Germany, as well as even in France in particular periods. And if we are looking at the average prices, so at the average prices in the day-ahead market, then we can see that for all countries, actually the day-ahead prices have been less than half. So in Belgium, where the levels were around 36 to 39 euros per megawatt hour, it has dropped to around 14 in this particular period. And also in Germany, France, and the Netherlands, we can actually see the exact same pattern. But where does this actually come from? And what does that mean, the renewable generation versus the prices? So in this particular figure, you can see the average day-ahead price observed in these four countries, shown on top of the renewable electricity generation from these four countries. And the very first thing is that actually that we can see that the day-ahead prices do not follow the renewables entirely, especially in these two black marked peaks. We can see that although the peak values of the generation are roughly the same, that the price levels are totally different. And the reason therefore is the lack of flexibility, especially in the weekends. So this particular price peak corresponds to a weekend day where, due to lack of industrial load, there is really very little flexibility in the system, whereas here we have a weekday demand where more flexibility is anticipated in the day-ahead market, and there we can actually see a clear impact on the demand values. So, and that brings me actually to my conclusions. And for the short term, I think it's going to be very important to keep enough security margins in system operation due to also the issues that Jeff mentioned. Due to the low loading conditions, we are now observing more higher grid voltages in the system. Obviously, having more renewables in the system means also that the system inertia itself is decreasing. And considering that in Europe we have the thunderstorm season between May and August, where of course the risk of line outages is much higher than in other periods of the year, it's going to be very important to keep enough security margins to operate the system. The second conclusion is, as also shown in the last slide, is that there is actually really a lack of flexibility, especially when there is not enough industrial load. And that also reflects itself in the day-ahead prices, where your expectation would be that the renewables actually are more dominant in building that price. So in a way, there is not enough confidence that there is going to be flexibility in the system, and that's very much reflected in the day-ahead prices. So that means that, first of all, on the short run, it's going to be important to invest more in demand flexibility and storage, but also make the intraday markets more liquid, that actually such price peaks can be avoided. And based on that, actually, we can also come up with some conclusions for the long-term future, I think, because in the current situation that we are in with the relatively low demand, which corresponds then, of course, also to a rather high percentage of renewable energy in feed, I actually see the situation as a sort of a scaled down demonstration or experiment of what we might expect in 2050. Although, of course, the demand will recover, hopefully by then, still the amount of renewables in the system is going to be much higher than today. So it's not going to be even remotely comparable to the situation that we have today. And that means if you want to have an efficiently working system in the future, then one of the first things that we have to do is to rethink the purely megawatt hour based market organization, because with such price peaks as we are observing today, it is going to be very challenging for the companies. Secondly, this reorganized market also needs to foster, I would say, the demand flexibility and storage investments, and also build a lucrative business case for all people who are investing in demand flexibility and storage. And that also will help them again to create more confidence in the electricity market, I think. And last but not least, obviously there is always the market side, but also in terms of technology, I think the transmission system and the distribution in itself must also be much more flexible than it is today, just to be able to cope with the expected flows in terms of the amount of flow and the volatility, but also connected to that with decreasing system inertia. Also technologies like HVDC should help to enhance system stability. And yes, that was our findings in a nutshell. And as it was said earlier, I think now we are going to look at the questions posed during the chat. And if you would have further questions, please drop an email to communication@energywill.be, and then we will pick it up as well.
Yes, thank you, Hakan. This is very good. And I have some questions for you, which are on the chat. I tried to answer them already, but I think some more details might be needed here. I just want to point you clearly to all of you that this has been a very, very dynamic exercise. The crisis started on the, say, 15th of March. The first real things was happening on the 1st of April. And this is the first report after 6 weeks. This is not the final report. This is something that we keep watching. But I think that we like to already give you some first view on what is happening, because otherwise it's taking too long, and that's what we wanted to do to bring that to you. But Hakan, as you see, one of the questions is that the negative prices, where do they come from? Why would people be so stupid to give you money to consume electricity?
Yeah, as it was, at least my observation in this case was that there was purely more generation in the system than there was demand. And especially on weekend days where you then barely have demand, especially in these times, yeah, you just don't get rid of the electricity. And that means that for the future, we have to actually be more intelligent with the way that we are consuming electricity, that we actually can shift our demand and provide more flexibility in that sense. And I think the next important thing is storage in that sense. So it also shows that there is not enough storage in the system, that we can accommodate the renewable energy that is produced and to put it again there when it's needed. So these are, I think, the two important things that we can take home from this.
Chef, has there been in the report from IEEE any elements on price and pricing, or is it purely technical?
There are some elements there as well. So negative prices is also something that is of concern to other world regions, but I think that Europe there is playing a key role in terms of these experiences, given the amount of renewables we have in the system. And also in other world regions with a lot of renewable similar incidents are being described here.
Okay. Another question is that what about the inflexible generation, classical generation? What do you think about that, Hakan? Some people are pointing to the nuclear, but there's also other inflexible generation.
I think just now trying to blindly switch off everything might be a bit dangerous, in the sense that, of course, when we have more and more renewables in the system, we have to take care of system inertia. So we still need this big classical synchronous generators in the system as much as we can, because, of course, if we have purely power electronic dominated generation in the system, then we might actually run into stability problems, especially when there are line outages and things alike. So at least from this particular analysis, of course, it's very difficult to say. I think for that, you really need to dive in very deep into dynamic studies to say how much system inertia you would actually need. So I think it needs to be a good mix between the both in order to keep the system operable, at least on the short term.
Jeff?
Yeah, I would like to to jump on this. This was, for example, one of the concerns also raised by the Australian transmission system operator. So Australia is a country where they have actually seen quite a drastic reduction in terms of classical generation, without necessarily having updated their grid codes for what they would actually want in terms of dynamic performance from the renewable energy sources. And they at least pointed out that if they would see similar levels of renewables as already reported in some European countries, they would be a bit quite scared of how they would need to manage their system. So it's really from a more operational point of view. Let's say in terms of how the system works, there is an implicit principle behind it, and to a large extent we are still basing ourselves, as Hakan pointed out, on the presence of some large unit that determine this response. The question is, what if we switch them all off? How is it going to affect that response? And that's something that needs to be taken into account. And
I mean, there are at least some examples which we can, of course, always look at, right? For instance, in Ireland, they have, I think nowadays, a renewable generation limit of roughly 70%, if I'm not mistaken. So this also this reflects, at least for the Irish system, what let's say the theoretical limits are in classical generation. But of course, we have to be aware that the Ireland system is much smaller than the continental European system. So there, of course, we cannot blindly say it's going to be 70%. And I think we have to be more confident in terms of modeling and scenarios in actually how much we can push this.
And this is it's also interesting that it's an ongoing discussion, and these numbers we've actually seen them increase over the past years, and it seems like the limits of what the system is able to take are going up as we speak. Mm-hmm. And there's, as Hakan pointed out, system operators like the Irish one would have gathered quite a lot of experience, and you also see it resulting in more refined, let's say, flexibility products, if you want, and new ways, new market frameworks to bring those services out there and to remunerate for these services to be delivered. So I think in that sense, a lot of lessons can be learned from it, and that's the direction in which we have to move. But that's not the direction which you take overnight. And in this respect, it's important to report that the Irish system is quite isolated. Obviously, it's only Ireland. Whereas if we talk about the European power system, we really have to see this in a European perspective. So it's not just Belgium as a standalone country, but there is a direct influence of what neighboring countries are doing.
Okay, this Also, what Elswena is saying here, that there is the incentives for having enough storage, demand flexibility, energy efficiency. It will be a balance between both sides. Both sides have to become dynamic. Generation is more dynamic due to the intermittent, and then we have to have the flexibility. And then Wim is asking, is demand flexibility in household consumption expected soon? Hakan, Jeff?
Let's put it that way. I think some 10 years ago, I think we would have expected to pick it up much sooner than it was. But I think, again, it's a matter of incentives. Nowadays, as a household, you also have very limited amount of possibility to actually earn money with your demand flexibility, because also your entire tariffing is based just on pure electricity consumption. So as long as I think we don't set the correct rules that these things are incentivized, and that for me as a person living in an apartment, that I have some incentive to provide demand flexibility, yeah, it's going to be very, very hard to convince people to do that.
Yeah, I think the numbers here clearly indicate that with a negative price peak, that residential load is not at the moment there where we wanted in terms of flexibility and bringing that to the system. And as also pointed out in the presentation of Hakan, this is one of the also important lessons to learn from this entire experiment, if you want, that's a direction that needs to be taken further for the upcoming years.
Then question regarding in general, the HVDC connections, which are spreading all over Europe more and more, although it's very soon after the elements. Is there anything that we can see from the first data we have that they had a specific impact on the whole price and flow system, or is it too soon to answer, Hakan?
I had a quick look actually at the NEMO interconnector, as it's also pointed out in the question. But on the first look, I couldn't really see a lot of change in the flow direction as such. So again, most of the flows were going from Belgium towards the UK, as it is expected, although in some hours the flows were reversed. And to be honest, I didn't go in detail there, but this might be actually a case of where basically there was import from UK to work against these negative prices. So that I am not so sure of. I haven't dived in detail there. But I think on the long run, anyhow, the better interconnected your system is, and if this interconnection is also flexible, I think the better it's also going to be for system operation, and then also for achieving price convergence all over Europe.
With respect to that price flexibility and intraday, do we need more intraday? How will we get more in, and also to reserve market, fast reserves? How are we going to get that much faster response of things, and how fast do we need to go to make those prices more stable? And what do we see, for instance, in Australia, Jeff, because they also have a very peculiar market, even a quarter of an hour market, if I'm not mistaken. Hakan?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there are already a lot of technology available, like batteries, and I think also on household level, actually, you can really provide a lot of flexibility in very short time instances. I don't think that this is really the biggest issue. But the issue is really to have the right incentives to get this actually more into the market, and also basically to maybe even move ahead from a purely day-ahead market to something which is closer to real time. That might already help you, because also then you already can use better forecasting and other things. So in a way, everything is moving faster. Life is moving faster, and I think the markets need to adapt to that. It's as simple as that.
But if you go to energy on a very short time horizon, you come close to capacity.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, if you derive energy by time, then you end up at power, right?
Yeah,
that's what the physics say.
That's mathematically correct.
Yeah, and yeah, I think this is the way it is going to go in the long run. Yeah.
Jeff?
Yeah, but I think so too. I mean, we will see market frameworks where this flexibility, or let's say the short-term side of things, is being remunerated more and more. And I think that at the same moment, it's also a lesson we can learn from other world regions where they're seeing quite an increased penetration of more flexible sources, or more renewable sources, sorry. That we will also need to gain confidence in the new technology, know their characteristics more, and not really see them as something that is passively hooked up onto the system and just needs to be there, but also as, let's say, a fully integrated market player that can also help the system in other aspects, which are not, let's say, unlocked at this moment. And in that sense, let's say, as you pointed out, Australia is making significant steps. Ireland is as well within Europe. I think it's important we learn from those experiences to update our thinking, because it's also clear from the presentation here today what the limit of the current thinking is with the challenges we are facing.
Okay. I think we covered all questions. Jeff, Hakan, thank you very much. And also thanking very much all the participants. What Jeff said, we have to learn from what is happening all over the world. I hope that we were able to show you that with Energyville, we try to contribute to that learning process and contribute to the knowledge, but also gather that knowledge and bring it in a concise way to you. This has been the first of a tryout. I hope that you liked it, and we will try to do this again if there are specific matters. And thank you very much. Stay healthy, and let's see each other back soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye.